Hello, happiness abounders, and welcome back. So, over the last month, we've been doing a deep dive into self care. We've spoken about physical self care, emotional self care, social self care, and intellectual self care. Now, the fifth one is spiritual self care. And I was saying before, as earlier in the month, I was like, I probably won't focus on that one so much because it is pretty personal. But I think I may have found some neutral territory for spiritual self care. So that's what this week is all about. So stick with me. Let's dive into spiritual self care in a very neutral zone, but how you can take care of yourself spiritually in a way that resonates and works for you. So, first things first, this is what I want to talk about today, and that is to reconnect to your values on weekly check ins. So, that's not saying that that's religious, going to something on Sunday. That's not saying that it needs to be on a specific day of the week. That's just saying really reconnecting and checking in about once a week. And not checking in with necessarily a higher power or whatever you believe in, but reconnecting to your values. And this is why I think this is spiritual self-care as opposed to something more religious, and this is why I also feel it's neutral territory. Your values may be connected to your religious affiliations. Your values may be connected to what you believe or don't believe, but they also can be completely different than those things. So doing a reoccurring check-in weekly to make sure that you're aligned with your values is a great way to make sure that you are on track and being the person you want to be. So one of the things to consider on that is, what are your values? Now, there's some episodes early in the year where I talk about defining values, so I'm not going to dive into that right now, but I will share with you what my values are and what a typical check-in for me looks like. So my values are interdependence, abundance, integrity, learning and growth. If you haven't guessed, that's a big one for me. It's pretty much every episode talks about that, and impact. So as I do a weekly check-in, I think to myself, am I making an impact? Am I doing something that is impactful, whether for me, whether for the people around me, whether for coworkers, brand partners, whatever it may be? Am I doing something that's making an impact, and specifically a positive impact? Am I looking for opportunities of growth and learning? What were those opportunities within the last week? That's kind of that tracking for intellectual self-care. Am I living in a space of integrity? Am I doing what I say that I will do? Am I who I am on camera, on podcast, the same way I am off camera, off podcast? Which I am. Am I living in a state of abundance, a mindset of abundance versus scarcity? This is one I struggle with, specifically with money-centered things. I have a big goal and a big focus right now on realigning and readjusting my money and abundance mindset. And by checking in with these values and doing it on a regular basis, I've been able to see that things aren't quite as aligned as I would like them to be. And that's an area and a form of spiritual self-care that I could be working on. And the last one is interdependence. So this one is a check-in for me that, am I still being me? Am I doing the things that I love to do, but I am also being reliable and responsible to those around me? It's not turning me into a people pleaser, but I'm also not a hermit, which kind of pulls into that social self-care element, right? If you remember that week. But it really is a time for me to look at, am I being codependent? Am I being too independent? How can I be interdependent and be trustworthy and responsible and respectful and still be there for people and kind of have that nice balance? So really, a weekly check-in can be something as simple as walking through those things. Sometimes it can be writing it out in your journal and putting interdependence up at top, and then underneath that, this week, I feel like some interdependent moments were this, and I could be improving here. This week, abundance, I really have been focusing on my money mindset, and I've been doing X, Y, and Z to be able to pull that to that next level and come back to center on having that abundance piece as one of my core values. So you can see how it goes. Sometimes it's just talking about it with your spouse. Hey, can I have a check-in with you? These are kind of my values and what I've been working on. Do you have any insight for me on what else I could be doing in this area? Right? But really, and that reconnection to your values, it can be as simple as just rereading them and reminding yourself of what you stand for and what you believe. And that can be a great form of spiritual self-care, because when we are not constantly reminded of our values, that's when things start to go astray. So doing that weekly check-in is a great way to come back to center. And again, this isn't religious. This isn't saying what your values should be, but this is saying to identify what's important to you. Those top 5 values in your life, those usually don't change. And at that point, you can make most of your decisions based on those values. And by doing weekly check-ins, you're constantly reminded of those values and reevaluating how you're living your life and if you are in alignment with that. Now, really funny, one of your values may be adventure. So you may have a week where you don't have any adventure. Maybe you're sick. Totally fine. But adventure could also be in the form of reading a novel, right? So it's finding, instead of identifying like adventure as a value and then doing a check-in and being like, well, I failed at adventure this week because I was sick. It's, oh yeah, one of my forms of adventure was I listened to this great podcast. One of my forms of adventure was that I read a great book. Sometimes adventure can just be going someplace new or taking a different route to work, right? So there's small little things you can do to have adventure. If adventure to you means big travel, then you can be doing that too. But on a weekly level, doing that check-in and saying, what am I doing that is providing me with this sense of adventure that is one of my core values? So there's so many aspects of this that I think can really relate deep down to, dare I say it, our soul, right? That spiritual self. Because when you are aligned with your values, you can reach an entirely different plane of who you are and what you can accomplish, which is the importance of spiritual self-care. So that said, throughout the rest of this week, some other things to be talking about surrounding spiritual self-care are discovering your passions and really stepping into flow, following what speaks to your soul and really identifying that heavy versus light kind of feeling in your decisions, watching your inputs and look for what does bring that lightness, and then having a spiritual form of self-care that can be centered around gratitude. So if that interests you, be sure to tune in for the rest of this week. If it's not of interest to you, totally get it. Maybe check out some of the other episodes. There are 370 more to choose from, which is pretty exciting. So that said, that's where I'm going to leave you with spiritual self-care today. Make sure that you know what your values are. If you don't, there's some earlier episodes. You can go to happinessabound.com, search values in the search bar, and several articles and podcast episodes will come up. But identify what your values are. Make sure that you're living within them by weekly check-ins and really reconnect with them as a form of spiritual self-care. So that said, have a wonderful day. Reconnect to your values. Have that form of spiritual self-care. Be sure to tune in throughout the rest of the week. And remember, you are capable of happiness abound.